you here again. My name is Luc de Koster, founder of the Koster Academy. And in this new video, I'm going to talk about the payback time. The payback time of an investment. And we will be looking into different cases, how to calculate the payback time, and to see what is the significance. But before we continue, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about. We've already been talking about different financial parameters like net present value, internal rate of return, and we also mentioned before the payback time. Now, the payback time is a very simple parameter which is used in many cases by business people because it's so easy to calculate and very easy to compare projects or to look at some initial parameters to accept a project or an investment, yes or no. When we look at the payback time or the PBT, basically we try to find out how long it takes to recoup the investment. How long does it take before the net cash flows, future cash flows, compensate the investment? The disadvantage of this parameter is that we don't consider the time value of money. It's a limitation, nevertheless. In many projects, when we compare the duration, we will see that the payback time gives us a very interesting parameter to compare different projects. Now we have to calculate the payback time, and the formula in its simplest form is just the investment, the initial investment, divided by the net cash flows. And the result that we get is a time when we express the net cash flows in monthly payments. Monthly, for example, we will see the number of months. When we use years, we will see how many years it takes to compensate, to recoup the investment. These are elements which are quite interesting, and we will look at two different cases. The first case will be where all the net cash flows are equal. The second case will be a little bit more complex, where we have different cash flows. The cash flows are not the same, and the calculation method is a little bit different. It's not rocket science, it's still quite easy to find out how it works, but the calculation has a few challenges that you have to consider, and it will help you to find the payback time in that case. So let's have a look at the first case. The first example I'm considering is when we have an initial investment of 600K and yearly net cash inflows of 250K. It means that we have in fact the same cash flow, the net cash flow every year. And when we use the classical payback time formula, we find just 600 divided by 250 is 2.4 years. And can we find that on the graph? Well, we see that for year 1 and year 2, we have a cash inflow of 500K, and then we have 250K. So we see that between year 2 and year 3, somewhere in year 3, we see that we come to the, let's say, that the moment we recoup the investment. So we find here somewhere 600K, and we compensated the initial investment. What can we see here? We have the alternative formula, where we look at the investment, the 600K, and then we look at the open cumulative cash flow, and we see this is the first 500. That's before we reach the 600K. The next thing we have the closing cumulative cash flow. That's here. So we have here 750. Here we have 500. So basically between the two, here we have 250, and here we have 100. And we apply it in the formula, we see that the investment minus the open cumulative cash flows divided by the closing cumulative cash flow minus the opening cash flow, we see that this is 600, this is 500, here we have 750, And here we have the 500, so that's that difference. So we find the 500, and we see that the payback time now can be calculated by the 100 divided by 250, which is also 0.4. So we find that the payback time is 2.4 years. Exactly the same value that we had before. And in the next thing, what we're going to do is to look at the same exercise, but now we will have different cash flows. So that's it. Let's go to the next part in a few seconds. In this example, we have basically the same initial investment, but the cash flows are different. Instead of having 250k every year, now we find that in the first year we have 300k, second year 250, then 200, and we continue with 150 and then 100. I didn't put the other cash flows there, but it's not really necessary to know them to calculate the payback time. We see again we are between 2 and 3 years, and what we see now is that the opening, let's say the first element that we have, the opening of the cumulative cash flow, we see that it's 550. The closing here is 750. We find here the difference between the elements is 50, so that's basically the investment minus the opening cumulative cash flow, and we find the different elements there. So the initial investment is still 600. We didn't change that. Now we have the opening cumulative cash flow here, which is 300 plus 250 is 550. And the closing is in fact now 750. And we can bring all these elements in the payback time. So we have 600 minus 550 divided by 750 minus 550. So we see the payback time is now 600 minus 550 divided by 750 minus 550. So we have the 50 here, which is in the numerator, 50, divided by the 200. So we see here 5 divided by 20, which is 0.25. And now we can say, because we are between 2 and 3, year 2 and 3, we can say that the payback time is 2.25 years. And that's the second calculation. When we don't have the same net cash flows, we have to consider it, or we have to do the calculation in a little bit different way. Anyway, it's quite easy to find it. We find the period just before we reach zero, then we look at the next cash flow until we reach the positive, and we calculate those differences, and we calculate how much we still have to compensate before we get to the positive number, which is 50, and what is the next cash flow that we have, which is 200, and that allows us to calculate the fraction when the payback time would be equal to 0, or let's say what the payback time would be because we compensate all the cash flows. In this case, it's 2.25 years, 2 years and 1 quarter, so it means 2 years and 3 months or 15 months. And with that number, we can see, is this acceptable for our industry, for the type of project we're considering? And then we can decide to keep the project or not, or to look at other parameters to have a better estimate of its profitability, looking at the net present value and the internal rate of return. So that was it for this video about calculating the payback time, looking at the different ways how to calculate the payback time. In the next videos, we will talk about how to evaluate projects, how to look at the payback time, net present value, and internal rate of return. But that was it for this video. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next videos. Bye bye.